The term rentvesting is thrown around a lot when it comes to the property investing space. But how do you actually know when it's right for you? Getting this right could massively impact your portfolio growth. This episode, I'm opening up on the rarely spoken about numbers to know whether rentvesting is the right strategy for you or if you should stay away from it. I'm Arjun Paliwal. Let's go. I'm going to start off with explaining more about rentvesting and what it actually means for those who are new to it. It simply means that you go out and rent in the areas that you want to live in, but you use your money that you may have used for a place to live in. Now you're putting it towards investments instead. So that's where the two terms of investing and renting come together. It's an alternate way to build a property portfolio without the emotions or feeling like you really have to go for a place to live in. Some actually go and use this strategy and then eventually come back to look for a place to live in. Others just stay renting forever and don't care about what anyone else's thoughts are or what they feel from an emotion perspective because they see more of the advantages from renting than they do buying. Now, there are many episodes on the InvestorKit podcast on the topic of rentvesting, but today we're going to go one part deeper. So stay until the end because in the end, I'm going to cover off the 3 different scenarios, which we'll go through one by one and how rentvesting is better in some and where you should actually stay away from it in other cases. So let's go into scenario 1 to understand where rentvesting can come in, but for a very particular type of property. In this particular case, in scenario 1, we're going to use a property that it's actually not as common as you think. We're going to talk about $5 million price points. Why is that important to talk about? Because when people talk about the most amazing luxury properties around Sydney or even other cities in Australia, they think of the price tag. They think of it being as unattainable. They even think of it as being that something just for a TV show, it's a bit of a dream, and why would I go and live there? Now let's actually break the numbers down and do the math, because when you do it, you'd be surprised to see if A is buying better there or is B renting a better option there. Let's go into it. So for this exercise, what I did is we used a $5 million premium property. We had an 80% mortgage and interest rates of about 6.5%. This was a 30-year loan term. And before I go into principal and interest, we're just going to focus on interest-only loan terms. And the reason why we're going to focus on interest-only, even though it's your home you're living in, is because many people talk about rent money as dead money. Now, if people think that's the case, wouldn't interest also be dead money in a way, considering that you're not paying down your property, the loan is the same, and the money's going to someone else? So if that's the case, let's just look at interest-only calculations, because if the actual rent amount is greater in cost than the interest-only calculations, then for sure, you're actually negative in this scenario and you're not coming out better. But is that the case here? Let's go into it. So what I'm going to do is shout out a few addresses that we're going to run through one at a time and actually start to show you these property prices and estimate rental yields. So the first one here is 5 Princess Promenade in Seaforth. This is in New South Wales, postcode 2092. And this particular property sold for $5.2 million, right in that aspect of $5 million price points we're looking at. Now this suburb has a rental yield of 2.5%, which is pretty horrible from an investment perspective. The next property is 32 Tottenham Street, North Balgowlah, also in New South Wales. This was a $5.1 million sale price with a rental yield of 2.6%. And lastly, we'll look at one more address, which is 204 Hudson Parade in Clareville, New South Wales. And this particular one had a $5,050,000 sale price with a rental yield of 1.7%. So what you'll notice amongst premium properties is an interesting theme. All their rental yields were between 1.7, 2.5, and going up to 2.6% from a suburb perspective. Now, they may vary in these sorts of properties, but why I wanted to share the address is so you can make it real, feel real, that, hey, I could be living in a $5 million place in this part of Sydney or that part of town where you live, whether it's on the coast, up on the hills, lots of land, you can, right? So now you look at these rental yields and you go, well, surely who'd want to buy a $5 million place and actually be renting that? That rent sounds expensive. That must be dead money. Well, let's break the numbers down. If you take a 2.5% rental yield on these purchase prices, you're looking at about $10,417 of rent. If you start looking at it from an interest-only perspective, it's approximately $23,000 of interest payments you're making each month. We're not even talking principal, we're talking interest. Put that in comparison to the monthly rental income that the person's receiving or the rent you'd have to pay. You're only paying $10,400 in rent in comparison to $24,000 or $23,000 in mortgage payments. And that's before you scratch the surface of council rates. That's before you scratch the surface of other bills and even just principal. So where in your renting position, you're not paying for all the bills that someone else would be that owns the property. And so from this perspective, renting is about $13,000 per month better than you living in that place and paying the mortgage for just interest. And consider this, when you're having that place in your name and you're living in it, you're actually not able to deduct the tax against your income. So it's not like that $13,000 loss is this tax deductible loss, because we're talking about a principal place of residence versus renting. So then why do people go and buy those $5 million homes, especially if they're down $13,000 on the calculations? Because it's important to be devil's advocate as well when you're looking into these scenarios. Well, the first reason is people want security. They just want to stay there and not have to move around from home to home. But I'm of the opinion that if you have to need security, well, you don't want to move around. I'm pretty confident that if you're paying, a $10,000 rent amount per month, you can probably afford a mover and someone who can pack the boxes, have it effortless, and maybe whilst that moving's happening, you go and do a staycation somewhere in town and feel like you can also spoil yourself as you move between places and experience a new amazing property to move right into. But hey, let's put that aside and let's just assume people don't want to do this because they don't want to have to keep moving around. The second one is long-term family memories, or staying in something where you call your family home. Things where you can raise your kids in or have generations even beyond the first batch of kids if that's of importance to you for your forever family home. So as you can see, most of the decisions are around emotive decisions, not monetary decisions. And it's not all about money, but that's just me talking about the emotions that come into play for someone willing to forfeit $13,000 a month just to get those emotive decisions in play. Whereas when you're looking at it from a calculations perspective, as a rentvestor, you can enjoy the exact same home. Some of these properties I've just put up for $5 million in some of the most nicest places, an example here of Sydney. And then from there, you're able to have over $10,000 a month in savings, actually even more on top of that because of all the other bills not considered, and be able to live in the exact same home. You can see why so many wealthy actually consider rentvesting. And even if you're not wealthy, this is a strategy where you can consider as you're building wealth, you don't have to fall into the traps of having that large mortgage. Now you can say, well, the property is gaining value, the asset's growing, it's a $5 million blue chip area that's growing. Well, hold on a minute. I never said you can't use your capital. That's the whole point of rentvesting. You can rent there and you can use your capital and actually invest in locations where you feel you're going to have the capital growth still exist. So that means your money's still working for you, whilst where you're living, the roof over your head, can be in these locations and have $10,000+ a month in cash flow savings. No matter how much you're earning, that's not a small number. So this is an example of where if you are rentvesting, the more higher you go in premium properties that you actually live in, the better the calculations are in your favor. So I don't want to say this, but I kind of am saying this. You can have a little bit of fun. You can splurge out as a bit of a rentvestor and go and enjoy yourself a bit more than you typically could when buying, just because the math's in your favor, like massively. Now, this could also mean more things for you. This could unlock lifestyle moves. For example, you might say, well, I want to live in this place of Sydney or Melbourne or whichever part, and then I want to move to a different coast. I want to move to another part of the town. I want to move to maybe the inner west or the eastern suburbs or the North Shore. So you can just keep moving. This is the brilliant part about rentvesting. And even if you paid the removalists and the movers and the packers and even paid for a staycation, you'd still be up on the math. We've done this before. So my wife and I, Lee, we've been on the journey where we would literally go and have a staycation at the Crown in Sydney or somewhere else and go, hey, let's go enjoy ourselves while someone's packing the home, setting up the new home, removing it, moving it on. So many things happen. You're supporting friends' businesses who are removalists and movers and packers. You're supporting people in terms of your family and spending time with them rather than being angry and upset that you're moving and having to lift all this stuff. We could hang with our family in the city. We enjoyed a weekend away as well and just really felt that we could go and let the hair down or whatever you want to call it. And then at the same time, the math was still in our favor because the mortgage repayments on that premium home was far more for that person versus what we were doing while renting. So before we got into our dream home, these were the statistics for us that were in our favor. So that's scenario one. I'm going to now give you two more scenarios to talk about where it may make less sense. And so scenario two is about rentvesting in an extremely high rental yield town. And so for this example, I've used the regional town of Broken Hill. And in this case, again, we're using the same LVR, loan to value ratio, interest rates and things like that. And the median price here is a whopping $200,000. Now with this median price, the rental yields, get ready for this one, 8.5%. Now in no way am I saying Broken Hill is a great investment place. I'm just talking about the math of where rent investing might be questionable. As you can see here, with addresses like 275 Wilson Street in Broken Hill or 328 Thomas Lane in Broken Hill, these had sale prices of $202,000 and $216,500. With the rental estimates and yields, this places them at between 7.9 to 8.4% rental yields. Huge. Now, if you consider someone actually renting these properties and you look at the medians, because you've got 7% yields in assets we surveyed all up to about 10.6%, we decided to just use an average actually, and we picked that 8.5% rental yield. So if you're using 8.5% rental yield on a $200K median price, you've got about a $1,400 monthly rental income. Now the mortgages for something like these properties here would have only been $867 on interest only. So you can see that's over $500 in variance, and that means the rental scenario is worse for you because you're paying $500 a month more in comparison. Now, it might get a little bit less when you factor in, again, rates and insurances and all that sort of stuff. So then you wonder, why are people paying rent in Broken Hill instead of buying? So this is an example where you can go deeper and look at the economy. Perhaps people are living there on certain jobs where they don't expect themselves to be there long term. Perhaps there's other reasons. Maybe saving a deposit is really hard for those in that area. So as a result, the main thing here is though, if you're a renter in that city, you're probably worse off in comparison to buying because now you're paying more rent. So this would be a classic example where rent vesting just doesn't stack up. Let's go into one more scenario. In scenario 3, I'm going to find something more balanced in the middle. So for this one, we're in Adelaide and we're in the Hills regions and we're looking at for a few properties. So the Hills and Tea Tree Gully, these two regions that we looked at. Median prices between them were about $750K. And there were rental yields averaging about 4.3 in many of these suburbs within this region. So that puts rents at about $2,700 per month at an average. Now we looked at a few addresses here. 34 Baxter Avenue in Surrey Downs, 45A Mill Road in Lobethal. Sorry if I've pronounced that wrong for my South Australians. Now with these two properties, they're sold at $745K and $770K, and with estimate rental yields of about 4.1 and 4.2. There was some up to 4.9 and some up to 4.4 in these suburbs, which means that rental yields in that 4.3 were pretty well placed when it comes to our estimates. So looking at mortgage repayments here on interest only, the interest only mortgage repayments here with some other things considered is about $3,250. Now with this $3,250, it means that the mortgage and rent number is about $560 worse off as a renter. So again, as a rent investor, you could be in benefit here during the high interest rates of today, because not even with interest considered are you covering it. So that's about $6,000 a year plus that you're saving as a rent investor living in these areas versus buying in. Again, now that the math is so similar, all it takes is a few interest rate declines and suddenly the buying math looks better for parts of Adelaide. So maybe Adelaide, being that middle scenario, can be a 50-50, because if interest rates come down and you're in that property and you get the capital gains tax concessions, you're holding it long term, you really want to call that place home and live in that area, then all it takes is a few interest rate decreases and suddenly that $563 per month shortfall is balanced out. And in that case, you'd say that rent vesting might not be as good if you tick all those other boxes and consider that. So you can see the scenarios depend on what you're looking at here when it comes to your preferences. If you're looking at living in some much nicer properties, in nicer areas, and looking to take advantage of the lifestyle, rent vesting wins all the way. If you want to really go around different parts of the country or the city that you're in and explore and feel like you can explore different neighborhoods, different restaurants, cafes, communities without feeling like you need to constantly make weekends of them to drive elsewhere, rent vesting wins. But if you want to live in a regional town and it's an extremely high yield and you do want to call that place home and not be there temporarily and you can save money, then buying a home would make sense. And if you're in the middle, rent vesting could be better today, but all it takes is some interest rate moves and the math will work more in favor of the principal place of residence. So I hope that helps you in understanding the math of rent vesting and where it works much better. The main thing here is that if you want to improve the lifestyle, live in nicer areas, in nicer properties, rent vesting is the winner. If you liked episodes like this on rent vesting, I've got a few more. Check out the InvestorKit podcast here on YouTube and follow and like and subscribe for more episodes like this.